Well, what you remember that first week of the war when that giant convoy was moving south from Belarus to Kiev, and we thought it was all over on like day 2, and then on day 4 it stopped because they forgot fuel, and on day 7 all the soldiers walked back to Belarus because they also forgot food. Everyone I know in NATO kind of came to the same conclusion that the Russians don't know how to fight. It's not that they've forgotten the lessons of the Soviet period, it's they've forgotten the lessons of the Tsar. They're almost starting from scratch. And if you put NATO up against the Russians directly, you're going to get 1,000-to-1 casualty ratios, and that made no one happy. But if we get that, if Ukraine loses and we get that head-to-head Russian-NATO fight, we know we will wipe the floor with them. But the Russians see this as a fight for their existential existence. Yeah, and they will use every card they have. The Russians see that, or Putin sees that. The Russians, there have not been protests in Russia, not just because the propaganda has dug into the Russians. He has more support than the West, thinks he does, and a lot more. There's not a challenge to him from within. And if you think back to the first mobilization, 1 million men fled the country, there were no protests. The Russians are broadly in favor of the war. They would just prefer not to fight in it. Let me hit this from a slightly different angle, knowing that I'm just going to get a lot of hate mail, no matter what I say. We have been living in a capital bubble for the last 10 years because the baby boomers' kids have moved out, but they hadn't yet retired. And that put a lot of money in a lot of things, and a lot of things to happen at a faster speed than they would have otherwise. And whenever you have a big capital bulge, a lot of strange stuff happens. The last big capital bulge gave us the financial crisis, and subprime before that, we had the economic expansion that led to the oil shocks. I see crypto is wrapped up in this bubble. And now that the is going away and crypto has to stand on its own, it's failing. I don't see any use case for crypto whatsoever. I detect some ambiguity with that. Can you clarify your statement there? It has no use case. It has no value. It is no store value, is not used in exchange. It won't be used in exchange. It can't supplement for a currency. Every case that has been put out there for why crypto should exist has already failed.
And really, we just got the zealots out there now, and they are now going to all send me hate mail. Globalization allowed us to farm things out. Everyone focused on what they did best and most efficiently, even if they were tilting the balance like the Chinese did, with subsidies in order to make it happen. That meant we've got sprawling supply chains that around the world, most manufacturing processes, especially in electronics, touch at least a dozen different countries. We now have to unwind all that, and we have to put it on a more stable system with shorter supply chains that are closer to home, and NAFTA is well set up to do this. But this transition period means we have to double the size of our industrial plant in just 5 years if the goal is to still have the products that we're used to today. That's hugely inflationary. But think about what it means doubling the size of the industrial plant, having locals produce products for locals, partnering with the Mexicans and the Canadians to make it happen at scale. This is going to be the greatest economic growth in the history of all 3 of the NAFTA countries. And when it's done, we will largely be immune to international shocks because all the work will be done here. This is a good story, but it's not a straight road from here to there, right? I mean, in the pre-globalized world, unless you had iron ore and steel and food and oil, you never industrialized. With globalization, now you only needed one or just a bunch of labor that you could use to buy all of it. Globalization made the world safe for civilian corporate traffic the world over. You take that away, and you're now
trading on your own internal market, your own security environment, your own economic geography, and the world we're going to go to is going to have a lot more in common with the 1840s than the 1940s because everyone is industrialized and modernized, but they're dependent on products coming from half a world away that just aren't going to be there now. If that's a car, that's bad. If that's wheat, that's worse. I am concerned about a series of brushfire wars as countries try to take matters into their own hands. But a lot of the countries that we've been convinced of that are significant long-term threats, most notably China and Iran, really are the countries that are going to suffer the most from globalization's fall. They really do need American overwatch in order to make sure that they can import and export, and without that, they are utterly incapable of managing that themselves. Not anytime soon. What got wrong is the reason that these countries did well in the time frames that they did is that their geography matched up to the premier technologies of the day. So as before, deepwater navigation, the most powerful country, was the country with the best maritime internal transport system. That was Ottoman Turkey, but then deep water navigation kicked in, and so the center of power shifted over to Iberia because they were on the end of a peninsula. And it was easier for the Portuguese and the Spanish to push out through the water and conquer the world than to go through Europe. Eventually, that technology migrated to places that could use it better, like the Brits, and then the Brits developed industrialization, and industrialization allowed them to bring a gun to a knife fight for a century. But then that technology moved to an area with better capital density that could use it better. That was Germany and the United States. So it's not that he's wrong about those arcs, but it's not like they have a used-by date. It's a question of what the technologies of the day tend to be and which geography can use those best. I am at the moment not convinced that the digital age is a fundamentally sufficient break from the industrial age to trigger something new. But even if it is something to consider that 90% of all the silicon that goes into all of the world's microchips comes from North Carolina, other than the burgeoning pile of cash under your mattress, what are you excited about? Well, it's not in cryptos and it's not in NF. It's definitely not in cryptos. It's not in stocks of, Russian companies. So what are you excited about? I mean, I'm bummed that globalization has ended or ending. It's created the best period in human history, but I'm really excited to see what's next, because if you've got North America really fundamentally remaking itself in less than a decade, that is going to change the American story and the Mexican story and the Canadian story, and that's going to take us some unpredictable ways. Hopefully most of them are going to be good, and on the backside of this, after everything cracks apart, fast forward 100, 115, probably closer to 30, 35 years, and we'll probably have a better battery system and we'll have a better transmission system, and then we can go back out in the world and basically remake it from the ground up. It's a great time to be alive if you're in the right spot. If you go missing, could it be that the greatest unsolved mysteries of our history were orchestrated by the Russians? Today we're diving into the provocative theories of Peter Zeihan, author of the New York Times bestseller, The End of the World is Just Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for joining us. Your book has stirred up quite the conversation. With its intricate look at civilizations dating back hundreds of years, you've certainly given us all a lot to mull over. Now, Peter, your book suggests that the end of the world as we know it is just beginning. That's a bold statement. Could you enlighten us a bit more on what led you to this conclusion? Fascinating, Peter. You've certainly done your homework. Your exploration of the past has led to some thought-provoking insights about our present and future. Let's shift gears for a moment. Your book has quite a few mentions of Russia. In fact, you suggest that they may have been key players in some of the most significant events in our history. Could you elaborate on this? Intriguing, Peter. Your theories about Russia's involvement throughout history are certainly compelling. It's a different lens through which to view our past, present, and potentially our future. Before we wrap up, Peter, is there anything else you'd like to add? Any final thoughts or insights you'd like to share? Thank you for that, Peter. Your insights have given us all a lot to contemplate. In conclusion, today we've delved deep into the theories of Peter Zeihan, whose book, The End of the World is Just Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization, explores the potential influence of Russia in the course of our history and the impending collapse of globalization. His theories, while provocative, provide a new perspective on how we view the world. Thank you once again, Peter, for joining us and sharing your intriguing insights. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on this intellectual journey. Remember, history is not always as it seems. Until next time.